us. Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you, Amanda. I'm Laurie Hood. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Mobilewalla. We are a technology startup that works with a lot of B2C brands, helping them with data enrichment and helping them provide data for their predictive modeling. And it is my pleasure today to be able to talk to Amanda Bailey, who is Vice President of CRM and Loyalty at a brand I think many of our attendees are familiar with. And if they're like me, really, really like and appreciate Tory Burch. So welcome, Amanda. So for those of you listening, we were thinking of breaking this up into kind of the first 10 minutes talking about Amanda's background and kind of how she got to what is a relatively new role. You're 90 days in at Tory Burch. And then based on her super deep experience with customer loyalty and customer engagement and sort of driving that customer journey, going deeper into that, and then closing with a little bit about networking and some thoughts in that area. So I am going to kick it off, Amanda, and if you'll sort of start with a little bit of your background and kind of your path to this new role.
Yes, absolutely. So talk a little bit about my background, because it's not exactly linear on paper. And I often explain it and it looks a little bit like this, which I think is more normal these days than anything else. But certainly it's shaped the marketer that I've become, albeit in a less traditional way. I started my career in finance as a wealth advisor and quickly realized that that wasn't going to be, where I spent the rest of my career. And I fell in love with the idea of marketing. So never formally trained academically. So I joined a marketing consulting agency where I really trained on the job to learn about performance-driven marketing and just became absolutely obsessed with how marketing can shape customer behaviors and actions. And it was really thrilling, and ultimately found my way after a stint in a startup, doing some things on my own, into hospitality. And I, prior to Tory Burch, spent about 8.5 years working at Hilton in various capacities in customer loyalty and engagement, leaving there as the head of global customer strategy and engagement for the brand. And now, and honestly, that is where I really developed my love and passion for this idea of customer centricity, which I know a lot of us are talking about today. And that kind of has led me into this role, a customer strategy role, a CRM role, really focusing in on the customer, and now having the opportunity to do it in a luxury fashion brand in Tory Burch, an amazing company grounded in some incredible values, led by an incredible founder and leader. And it's just really fun to take kind of all the different experiences in building to become a marketer, but really a customer-centric marketer is kind of how I like to define myself.
No, that's fantastic. And full disclosure, a little envious because it does sound a lot more fun than marketing, data, and artificial intelligence. So I look forward to kind of more insights that you're going to share with us. So career change, pandemic, all kinds of crazy, what sort of prompted you to make the change now, and how was it making the change at this time?
Yes, an interesting time. I'd say, like many industries, the pandemic rocked travel to its core. We were in a position where we could not proactively sell the core of our business and our offering. We had to put our strategies, our work, and even some of our people, quite frankly, on pause and really dig deep to keep the lights on. That experience was not only hard, but eye-opening. I really had to go back to the basics and focus on the biggest points of leverage with minimal resources and people to really, drive the business. Over time during the pandemic, I was fortunate enough to bring my team back along because we really were the team that was driving our credit card marketing, communicating with our best customers, our most loyal members, which was really critical during the pandemic to make sure those customers would be there when we came, out the other end. And so in that experience, what I realized is, this was many months, and I kind of looked around as I brought back the team 2 by 2, 1 by 1, and I just sat back and I said, I have a truly remarkable team. And once this business is stabilized and my team is back in place, I'm ready to see what else I'm capable of and take on a new challenge, get outside of my comfort zone, and make sure that I was taking all of this, hard, but yet exhilarating moment in time to kind of catapult into the next thing. So for me, the pandemic was just a moment to kind of reset and recognize all that I had built to date at Hilton and what I was ready to now go and try my hand in going forward. So that was really kind of the impetus for me.
So when we were preparing for this, you had also mentioned that the job change kind of helped you achieve one of your goals, which was working in New York. And talk a little bit just kind of about that and the balance and those sorts of things.
Yes. So for a long time, I always regretted never taking the leap when I graduated college, working in New York. I had some opportunities, I had lots of friends and folks that I was like, oh man, I really wish I would have done that. And, I've since become a mom of two. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I'm like, oh man, this ship has sailed, or I have to really pick up my life. And what's been great about this moment in this pandemic, and it has really flattened and made things possible, even in the short term, and where my future holds and where I'll move to next is TBD. But this idea that I can go take on a job in a city that I love and spend some time there as well as here to get my feet under me without uprooting my entire family has been a true fortune that I've come upon and great opportunity. So yes, a happy coincidence and just opportunity that I'm incredibly excited about.
No, I think it's very cool. And just, I loved when you shared that kind of your perspective about having the balance, but still being able to achieve, a career goal. Absolutely. So you're finishing up your first 90 days. How did you, when you moved into your new role, kind of how did you approach coming up to speed? And what was the strategy that you incorporated that you felt was particularly effective? And again, especially in these kind of crazy times.
Yeah. So I have to start with, a little shout out to Michael Watkins in the first 90 days. Hopefully you guys can see that. But it's truly an amazing book. I've used it several times. It's an amazing tool for any career transition, even within an existing company, to really take a moment to reset and focus those early interactions in an incredibly productive way. So the book's been recommended to me in different ways, and you kind of take the content differently based on where you are in your career journey. So I'd say though, the 3 things for me, without kind of getting into the nuances of the book, which I highly recommend, is, 1, setting a simple goal for each of the first 3 months and really focusing in on how will I achieve it. And for me, in the first month, for example, I'd never worked in retail. I'd never worked in fashion. And so I just knew I had a lot to learn just about the industry, and answering questions around what metrics matter. What do customers care about in this space? How do I think about the competition? So there was so much before I could even think about doing my job, make sure I understand the context in which I'm working in. The second area is doubling down on building relationships with my direct team and indirect team. I like to say I'm a team maximizer. It's one of my strengths. And so for me, building relationships, understanding the people that I have around me to come together to achieve big things is a really important and key aspect of how I do my job. So building those relationships from day one, also a big focus for me. And then lastly, focusing my energy on where it matters most, and doing that by making sure I've been clear with my boss and understanding, what matters to her and my team, what they're expecting of me from day one, so that I can make sure that I'm focused on the right things, versus spreading myself too thin. I think, as a type A person, you kind of want to get in and do it all. And especially coming from a company where I knew the business for a very long time. So just being honest with myself around what I could achieve and what would really matter in these first 90 days. So I am coming up to that next week. So hopefully this was an effective strategy, but we shall see.
Yes. And that is a great book. And I think it takes tremendous restraint not to jump in a new situation and be that annoying person who doesn't know the business but always wants to give tons of advice. We've all worked with them, and just to learn. And I think the relationship building is so critical, and we'll touch a little bit on that some more at the end of our discussion. But I want to use your response kind of as a segue into talking more about customer loyalty, the customer journey, some of the things you brought, from your previous roles. You transitioned from an industry, and as you mentioned, was massively impacted by the pandemic, into one that I think a lot of people view, retail, and if you were online, it was a pandemic winner. What did you see as sort of some of the similarities and differences when you look at the two different industries?
Yeah, so in my opinion, simply the pandemic has been almost the ultimate consumer disruptor, whereby it's truly changed how consumers interact with brands in their life. And at the core, the brands that survived the pandemic and then I believe are going to thrive post-pandemic are those that have found a way to meet customers where they are and then reorient their business during and post-pandemic to satisfy the customer needs and desires. So that's really kind of, regardless of the industry, one of the big takeaways that I think about when I think about companies that have come through and what they've paid attention to.
So if you step back, what have become kind of universal truths for you about customer engagement and customer loyalty, based on all of your experience?
Yeah, so I've thought a lot about this and have had many conversations. I've also done reading, and I'd be interested, even in the audience, kind of just jotting some things down that you've come across in your readings around, disruptions in the past and what they've done more broadly to the world that we're living in. And they have a tendency to kind of accelerate these mainstream consumer behaviors and expectations where, pre-pandemic or pre-disruption, they were kind of nice to haves or happen once in a while, to kind of this post-pandemic or post-disruption that they become a reality and a truth that we need as leaders and businesses need to manage. And so there's a couple of them, in this particular disruption that I'll call out. The first one is this expectation that digitally enabled experiences were valued and present, but primarily in retail. And now post-pandemic, the reality and the expectation is this like seamless omni-channel experiences are expected in all industries. So for when I was working in travel, that meant really putting pressure on a contactless arrival. And when you were in a hotel, how you could have the experience you wanted that was in your control and enabled digitally. And in the environment I'm in today, how are we connecting your online shopping experience that you've come to enjoy and appreciate during the pandemic to, as you come and return to stores, what does that experience then come and look like? And how is that connected? Because that is the customer expectation. The second area, have to do a nod to health and wellness because it's a passion point of mine. That was always acknowledged as important. And you always had the people you knew like, oh, he or she is really fit, or they care a lot about their health. For me now, health, or as I think about the post-pandemic world, like health and wellness are paramount in our decision-making. And they are ever present in our life, both mentally and physically. So that has become a truth and a reality that we're all working through it in different ways.
I think too, the pandemic has brought very much to the forefront, much more of a focus on mental health.
Absolutely.
And be it the existing mental health issues that we've kind of swept under the rug for years, and then kind of the exacerbation brought on by the pandemic. So I think health and wellness is such a great point.
Yes, absolutely. And especially in light of World Mental Health Day on Sunday, I mean, the amount of folks that are overt and speaking about how important this is, I think it's something to pay attention to in marketing and companies. And I'll talk later about relevance. I mean, this is what people are thinking about, and it's important to consider that in how you go to market and brand. Then I'll kind of quickly go through the last three. and Laurie, this will probably speak to you, consumers are willing to give their data, or pre-pandemic willing to give their data if it was going to add value to their experience. Now the expectation is that the experience should be personalized to their needs, when they want it, how they want it, where they want it. And that idea of if I'm going to give you data or interact with you, you better use it to make to meet me where I'm at. And so that has been something that I think all companies are really, some of them winning on, some of them trying to figure it out, of just really how do you put all that data to work in an effective way to serve consumers.
And I mean, the pandemic really gave even more power to the consumer. I mean, the shift had been happening over time, and then it really just flipped it because you've got so many options, so many more people are online. Again, as someone looking for a product or service, the possibilities become endless, which for the brands though puts tremendous pressure on the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And then maybe the next one, kind of building into that, this idea of loyalty programs. I come from a loyalty background, and it's part of my role today to kind of really figure out the role of loyalty at companies and what it really drives. Pre-pandemic, I think loyalty programs were primarily built and designed to serve the business first. And now the reality is that loyalty program should serve the customer first. And how do we design for that? How do we make sure there's the right model to make it profitable, to drive longer term value for the business, although using the customer centristic model as a guide to how that loyalty program or offering or contract should be delivered. So I think that's a really fun one as a customer, of being a customer obsessed, but also a big shift in kind of the role of loyalty programs and loyalty as we think about, the new reality that we're in. And then, lastly, just to touch on, because it's so important, this idea of, value-led brands. Pre-pandemic were really differentiated. It was like, wow, that's a really great brand. They lead with their purpose. They put their values at the center. Now, having those strong values and purpose and belief system is an expectation of all brands that consumers are interacting with. I believe Melissa was talking about the younger customer. I mean, that is so critically important. So how you reorient your messaging and your branding around that is an expectation that we're all figuring out as we go to. So all so much to say, regardless of industry, hopefully you can take away some things and think about, even your own, world of, how do these things impact your business? And, really thinking about this post-pandemic world and some of these customer truths around how to be, more intentional in how you deliver on these customer expectations and needs in this new environment.
No, that was great. And I was definitely scratching down a lot of notes. And I loved how at the end of the previous session, Melissa was talking about Ben & Jerry's is such a respected brand. And to your point, I mean, they've been a long time brand that very much lived their values and espoused those very publicly. And I think you bring up a great point that it's expected. I think too, in the evolution of baby boomers versus Gen X versus Gen Z, there's also a lot of different thinking as those buying groups, become of age and have more economic power. So you talked about this expectation with loyalty programs that previously they were for the brand, and now you really need to shift your thinking and they need to be for the customer. Taking a little dip into the technology side of the business, it also seems like a lot of brands were caught a little flat-footed with the pandemic, that maybe their, online channels weren't up to snuff, their ordering, that sort of thing. What do you see in terms of making technology investments, new investments, anything, different tools, using data, things like that? How do you see that playing a role?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're in the customer technology, line of business, this is an amazing time for you to really show up. And I think it's really exciting because, to deliver on some of the things we just talked about, personalization, relevancy, meeting me where I am. I mean, you need the data, and companies need these signals to know when to show up for you. So it's no longer enough to just look at hindsights and then, think you're going to do the right strategy going forward, which is, at least in my experience, how a lot of CRM and marketing has been for quite some time. We're now in a world where we are expected as companies to pick up on the signals of how you're engaging on our website or in the broader digital ecosystem, and what interests you in those moments, and then how can we deliver our product and put it in front of you in a way that's relevant and contextualized. And so to do that, you need data and technology. And just kind of a point on the data. It is relatively easy these days, I think, to collect data. Once you get the permissions, then you can start collecting all these signals, and you have it, right? I think the trick right now is, making sure that you then know how you have the capabilities in place or the marketing technology in place to go and use it effectively to activate against that data. So you're not just collecting data for data's sake, but truly, collecting relevant data that then you can use in your consumer-facing communications or the way you design your experience so it's seamless and relevant to the customer. So for me, like in marketing, and even from where I was coming from in a 100-year-old, your young company to, a founder-led company, very different extremes, but ultimately kind of coming to the same place of really, how do we take this data that we've been collecting and activate it and use it in a meaningful way, is, I think, a challenge we're all facing in different capacities based on the maturity of our business, our technology, and the relationships we have with our customers.
Yeah, I see with a lot of our customers, it's easy to get lost in the data.
Yeah.
And my suggestion is always figure out what you have that's meaningful, start there. Then try to go, and usually you can control what your organization has, but there are other people in the company where you're like, ooh, I'd like that, or I'd like that piece of data. Sometimes they're like, no, that's okay, it's mine. But put a stake in the ground, start using it in a way that it's going to impact that relationship positively. Then look at that next ring, then start looking, okay, I'm maximizing what I have internally. How can I go externally and see what other data points are going to make a difference? And you made such a great point when it's, what's the data that's going to make a difference in how you engage and being more proactive and much more personalized.
Yeah.
So when you, in your current role, what are some of the key, let's talk a little bit about kind of top line goals, big Tory Burch goals, and then how those filter down into some of the things you're focused on with your team.
Yeah. I think at the highest level, we want to continue growing our business and being relevant to the customers of tomorrow and this next generation of customers, and how we do that in an authentic way is something that we're all striving for. How that kind of trickles down in my world a little bit is I like to simplify things around three key areas. We want to get more quality customers. So this idea of getting customers, you can grow your business in a lot of ways, and yep. I know that from my past life, especially. But it's the idea of quality, like defining quality and what it means to the business. What are the customers we care most about? What behaviors do they exhibit? In our world, are they shopping full price or are they shopping markdowns? Who's more quality? Like, who are the customers that we want, and how do we define quality? So thinking a lot about the things we do to drive more quality customers. The second area is to get them more engaged, even beyond the purchase moment, and really trying to broaden our perspective around engagement and what that means beyond, before purchase and post purchase, of how we can stay top of mind with our customer set. And then lastly, doing that more often across our channels, online and in store, for example. So, try to keep it simple, more quality customers, more engaged, more often, and really honing in and working with all of the leaders in the business to define those traits and those characteristics to make sure they're meaningful, relevant, and measurable, is how I like to think of, the world in which I sit in customer strategy and marketing.
How do you see sort of pre and post pandemic? You mentioned cross-channel. is the mix of channels shifting, whereas before maybe it was very in person, now it's gone more digital? Do you see it moving back, or is it just, I need to optimize across all of them because I just don't know where that customer is going to come in?
Yes, apologies for some background noise outside the door. Garbage day. So, I think that in marketing in general, the channel landscape and the platforms and where people are engaging is constantly changing. And when you break down each of those areas around acquisition versus engagement versus your conversion moments, they do vary, and you have to be open and flex. And so, I think I mentioned this a little earlier, kind of in this post-pandemic world, the biggest thing for me is that connected channel experience and being where you are, because every customer interacts with brands differently. And especially when you have a set of legacy customers that have been trained to interact with you in a certain way in certain places, and then you have new customers in that have different places that they go. Let's use TikTok. I know we're talking about TikTok before. TikTok is a whole new world, and a lot of our existing customers don't actually engage in that platform. So how do you actually balance the investments you're putting in new channels versus the, content and activity you deliver in existing, proven channels? And I think that's constantly the balance, and one that we're, as marketers, I think we all face as these things evolve, pandemic aside, of, when to jump into new channels, when to, how much to put in your existing channels, and for what customers. So that's kind of what's always on my mind and on that topic of thinking about where to be and where to show up.
Yeah, I think one of the incredibly exciting things and absolutely exhausting things about being a marketer is just the number of channels that we're now looking at. It just grows exponentially, and no channel goes away. Like even in B2B, they were like, oh, print is dead. Oh, in-person's dead. Nothing is dead, and just more keeps coming. And it's just, there's so much to think about when you really do have to consider that cross-channel experience and the proliferation of social media channels, other digital, even I'm sure phone. People still send catalogs. I mean, it's and as a marketer, what's your strategy for all of them?
Right. I love that you said, like, they never go away, and sometimes they come back in full force, or just kind of reimagined.
Yes.
Thinking about in person, right? Like now it's all about pop-ups and experiences. And it's like, well, that's just, in-person shopping or interactions, but it looks and feels so much differently. Direct mail. I think there was a time whenever that was dead, but now in some places with some customers, it's a very, very effective channel.
Yes.
So it's like all of these things, and it's all about who you're trying to reach and where they're at, and using your channels to get to the right folks. So,
and sometimes can you exploit a lesser used channel because there's not as much noise in it? No, it's crazy. Well, we've got 10 minutes left. If I'm doing my mental math right. And so I want to just switch a little bit and talk about just the importance of networking. You had mentioned relationship building with your team, but relationship building kind of broader in the marketing community. And you're involved in a very interesting networking group called Chief that's focused on supporting women leaders. So can you just share a little bit more about the group and how you got involved?
Sure. Yes, Chief is a phenomenal group. I love the mission, really committed to getting women in positions of power or leadership and keeping them there. And, I think the piece that is really meaningful and being part of this group I'm really appreciating is the keeping them there aspect, because you've heard things like it gets lonely at the top, or you don't know who you can really trust or lean on. And so I found finding this group of women to connect with that have been through those accelerations in their career, or the things that you're kind of managing through day to day, it is so helpful. And so I think I can speak for many women and not overstating here, but, often we're wearing so many hats in our life, from professional to mother, to partner, to daughter, to friend. And, we take a lot on. And so, you really need to, for me, I learned, especially in the last, I'd call it 3 years, and maybe more explicitly in the last 2 years, like how critical it is to have a network that isn't your team and your day to day, but just kind of some folks that can provide different perspectives. And so I would encourage everyone, whether it's Chief or another network that you feel passionate about, finding that place, because it is so important to kind of have a sounding board. And then it also makes you feel good too, because sometimes your experiences can help others. So, for me, that's what networking, relationship building, and being part of a community is really about, is, getting support from the community, but also being able to like give back in a way that feels, authentic and true to yourself. So I love that. And it's a big part of, I make time for it. It's a commitment, it's a big commitment, but, I'll have like some tips to maximize it. I can give you, but that's why I joined it. And that's what I really see being the big value.
Well, so you teed that up. So talk about some of your tips to maximize it.
Yeah. So I think the first thing, and I always say this, is show up. Like anything else, you'll get from it what you put into it. So show up. They have, in my case, there's lots of events, experiences like today. So thank you to all of you that are making time in your day to join this, to just be there and show up and listen. And then the second piece is engage, engage in the conversation, share what you're experiencing, and don't hold back. I think that's a big part of being a part of this group. If you're just kind of observing and you're not really engaging, you're not really going to get a lot out of it. So you have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to engage, and you with the group to know how they can best support you and how you can best support them. And then lastly, share out, tell people about it, tell people about your experience, what you're getting out of it, and what you've learned. So there's so many moments where I have a great session with my core team, which is 8 women in our executive coach facilitator every 6 weeks. And so I can't tell you the number of times I'm leaving that like, oh my gosh, I really need to share this with my team, because you can kind of take these things and extend them beyond these immediate groups. So that's how I think you can really maximize it, be it Chief or any other network you're in, to really show up, engage, and share out.
That's great. That is incredible advice. When I talk to young people, I always tell them, you need to find a group that personally you're interested in, be it a charity or something like that. And you need to engage with a professional group. There's so much to learn. That support network, even sometimes it's just someone will reach out and say, am I crazy? I just need to talk to someone. I need to talk it through. And in a lot of cases, some of us, depending on your marketing situation, you don't have a big team. You work in a company where nobody really does understand marketing or what you do. And it so helps to just get insights and ideas and things like that. I just found it to be a really positive experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we did have a couple questions come in, and we do have a few minutes left.
Sure.
The first one, what do you see as the biggest sort of future challenge in retail and e-commerce? And what do you see as the biggest opportunity?
Great question. I think the biggest challenge is, going to be customer retention. The choices that they have, the accessibility of products and experiences in a digital environment. It just makes things more accessible. So, before, I think in a retail world, you kind of went to your stores, and if it wasn't in your local market, that was it. Today, you can shop for any brand, anything you want all over the world.
Yeah.
And so I think, despite obviously some hiccups we're having right now because of the pandemic and shipping delays, that will stabilize. But this idea of like, how do you really keep your customers loyal and coming back when they have so many choices? And so that, I think, is something we all need to be thinking about, and really is the opportunity. When I talked a little bit before about loyalty, I'm really kind of thinking with like, what job is your brand trying to solve for, and how can you show up for them and deliver experiences that go beyond the transaction to keep them coming back. And so that's something, like, I think is hopefully starts to counter some of those challenges, but I think about that often, and I think it's a big deal for retailers. And then on the opportunity side, maybe that's kind of leading into that, is to really gives you, and I had this experience in my last role as well, it gives you freedom to really put the customer first. Because if your whole risk and challenge is around keeping your customers, and you obsess over what you can do to make their experience better, to keep them with you. And so I think it's a huge opportunity for companies to show up differently, to innovate their experiences, to diversify their product set, because that's what's going to keep the customers. It's going to keep you relevant. It's going to keep them excited about what you have to offer. And so I think just kind of balancing those two things, and is really provide some inspiration and urgency in what retailers will do.
Great points. And there was one last question. We have like 2 minutes left.
Sure.
A lot of brands drastically reduced media budgets over the past year and since the beginning of the pandemic. And you may answer more from your previous role, but how is your media plan adjusted? And if the budget was reduced, did you get more creative, get more efficient? Did it really make you dig in and rethink your strategies?
Yeah, so I'll try to answer this quickly. I know we only have 2 minutes, and probably speak more to my past life, but I'll just take travel for example. We had big media budgets. We had to reduce them because, quite frankly, it was a waste of money to be promoting our core product in a world where people couldn't do travel. So it really forced us to think about, where we were putting our dollars, and going to more of a performance-led media investment versus, big brand budgets. And so I think as we step back into this new reality, companies, media agencies, there's more pressure on what your investments are going to deliver, the ROAS on all of your activity. So just being really, focused on what matters to your company. Is it branding? Is it performance? And trying to align the media strategy accordingly. I think there's a lot more pressure on it today than there was pre-pandemic.
Yeah, I definitely see it from the B2B side. And we didn't have very generous budgets to start with. So, so much more tightened up. Okay, quick fire challenge.
All right.
1 minute left. 1 minute left, and no one's come online to kick us off. So yet. 3 key takeaways as you look at 2022. What are the things that you're thinking about? I can't believe I'm even asking a question about 2022, but it'll be here in a minute.
Is it really coming?
Yes.
Okay, so quick fire. Be obsessed with being relevant. Sometimes that means personalization. Often it's actually paying attention to the world and what's going on around you. Second thing, always leave room for agility and flex in your plans, because things can change at the drop of a pin in the bucket, and you have to change course. And then lastly, embrace the whole self. The lines between work, life, physical health, mental health have all blurred. And the more we can appreciate all sides of ourselves and of our people, makes us more connected, engaged, and successful. So those are the 3 things on my mind.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. It was such a treat to be able to talk to you this afternoon. And Emily, we'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I was just looking at your LinkedIn's, and Laurie, I see that you went to Clemson University. I went there as well.
Tigers, yay!
Yeah. So I was like, go Tigers. And then also it's a fun connection, because I think my first pair of Tory Burch sandals I got was for sorority recruitment at Clemson. And I stood on my feet for hours, and I didn't have blisters. So I've been a loyal fan ever since, because those were long days. So fun little connection between both of you.
So awesome.
Yeah, but thank you so much for being here. That was such a great session, and we hope to have you both back again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Bye.
Well, we're excited to transition to a new industry for our next Fireside